Belichick, and this is my presentation on literature circles. I decided to do a little research on a middle school methodology of teaching literature. And instead of teaching middle schoolers, I wanted to see how it would work with high schoolers. I teach high school English at Pequot Lakes High School, and this time of year, March, April, May, we have a lot of absenteeism, a lot of loss of motivation, a lot of senioritis. And so I wanted to see if literature circles would help my high schoolers and if it would be an effective way of teaching older students. So I started with my world literature class. It had 14 students, 7 boys, 7 girls, and we have 2 months until graduation. And they really could care less about everything that comes out of my mouth. So in order to teach them about Middle Eastern culture, I chose the book 3 Cups of Tea by Greg Mortensen. Typically, a literature circle will use several different titles that students will be able to choose on their own. Due to financial constraints and the timing of this, I really only had one option for them. So 3 Cups of Tea it was, and we had an adventure reading it. Some of the benefits that people who use literature circles claim are communication and listening skills, because students are essentially doing small book discussions. They set their own schedules and they read and have basically an adult book club. So they learn how to communicate and how to listen to each other. They're also practicing their critical thinking skills. And of course there is student-directed learning that goes along with literature circles. And students who are directing their own learning, theoretically, are coming up with themes that they're interested in and learning what they want to learn about the material. So instead of the teacher dictating what the students are supposed to glean from a text, they figure it out for themselves, which is easier on the teacher too. So how do literature circles work? Well, it starts out with students getting into groups. In this case, I assigned my students to groups of 4 or 5, and they each got a copy of some roll sheets. They took turns doing the rolls each week, and some of the roles we used were the questioner, discussion director. The questioner or discussion director is kind of the one in charge of the group. During their reading, the discussion director comes up with questions or topics that their group should discuss. It's an important job. I had my questioners meet with me before literature circles because I wanted to make sure they got it right and that their discussions were going to take more than 30 seconds. Some of the things that they could look for were down here, tips to consider. And I asked them to look at questions like the characters, what are their motivations, any in-depth discussion of what is going on in the story of the plot. And this one was my favorite. Commentary on the social, political, or economic context in which a work was written, because 3 Cups of Tea is about building schools in Pakistan. And interestingly enough, we've had some world events this past week that have kind of led to some great discussions about that. Another role would be the summarizer. This person would basically just summarize kind of what's going on in the book, so the rest of the students would get an overview. The travel tracer was kind of fun to do with 3 Cups of Tea, because the travel tracer kind of mapped out what was going on in the story, where things were happening, and it gave students an opportunity to learn a bit more about Pakistan and Afghanistan and India. And I saw some really interesting maps that were actually drawn out so students could see the routes that the characters were traveling. Another one that was very popular was the researcher. And the students who were researchers looked for biography, in the beginning of the book, he's climbing a mountain, and we talked about mountain climbing and all the gear that needs to be done and the number of people who died on top of mountains. And we did a lot of digging into the author, but that will be some information that I will give you in a few moments. And lastly, we used the connector. And the connector's job is to find connections between the book and the reader, or between the book and the world. And the connectors had a lot to say this week as well, or this unit as well. When the students had their roll sheets at their first meeting, they set up a calendar. I gave them a schedule of how long this was going to take, and they set up their own reading schedule. We also had several group discussions on the calendar, and their group discussions lasted from 30 to 35 minutes typically, and they had to lead their entire discussion. My role was just to observe them and to make sure they stayed on task. There was a lot of self-direction and self-assessment in this unit. We used the sticky notes, schedules, and self-evaluation. As they were reading, they were encouraged to use sticky notes to keep their places and to write down any vocabulary words or questions that they had for later, and topic ideas, discussion ideas. They made their own reading schedules, and most of them stuck to their self-prescribed reading schedules. And as for self-evaluation, they were encouraged to keep quiz questions, because they wrote all their own quizzes as a group. So they came up with quiz questions. I put them all together for the entire class, and they wrote their own quizzes, which was easy for me. Because with literature circles, the teacher is really a facilitator, not a teacher. The teacher observes, prods, takes control as necessary. Students are directing their own learning from the material. I thought they had a lot of really interesting ideas. I saw them come up with a lot of themes that I may have not necessarily taught them. So it was kind of exciting to watch them take control of their own learning. So everything was going great. Everything was wonderful, but then of course something went wrong. This is the author, Greg Mortensen, and 60 Minutes did an expose on him 2 weeks into our project, and it was discovered that he may have lied about some aspects of the book, and he may have been cheating his charity, the Central Asia Institute. One of my students told me I can't read about a guy lying for 200 more pages, and all motivation went out the window. We also had a problem with senioritis. I am working with all seniors, and as of today, they have 17 days left in school, and they remind me every day. They have been procrastinating. They don't care about their grades. They're coasting. They really would prefer to just skip my class on a daily basis. And I have the added shortcoming of being their last hour of the day. So the senioritis and Greg Mortensen's possible, we're not proving it yet, possible dishonesty really threw them for a loop. They felt really cheated, and they just lost all interest, or me. So what were my results? They really were kind of meh. They were kind of neutral, but they did catch my attention. I thought the groups were going great until we had the whole problem with the author. And what I found was 60% of my students understood the material better in the literature circle format. That's what they told me on their end of unit assessment anyway. And 70% of my students tried harder and did more work for their group discussions than they ordinarily would have, which was awesome. They were actually until the big Greg Mortensen bus stop. Some of their comments were, "I hate this because I can't skim and relax in the back of the room while everyone else talks." I'm taking that as a positive statement, even though they think that they hate it. Another student said, "You're giving us a lot of freedom to make our own choices. It's a little scary to be out there on our own," which I think was kind of interesting because in just a few short weeks they will be out there on their own. Another student said, "I like the group talks. It's less pressure to say the right thing." So I thought that I definitely needed a larger sample size and a longer time frame for further research because I was unsatisfied with the results. The groups themselves seem to be working, and then my group just, for whatever reason, shut down, and I was unable to continue. I was unable to motivate them anymore. So they were sad. They were positive, but they were also negative. So I think I will try this